What's happening, Internet fam? I'm here today with Gary Cordery, and he is running for governor of Hawaii. Gary, how are you?
I'm very well. Thank you, Brian. How are you?
So, of course, I know you from all of our days muckraking and trying to create political change on Oahu and Honolulu specifically. I mean, we were there shoulder to shoulder fighting for people's rights to breathe. Right? Strange that that's the world we live in now, where we got to fight for our right to breathe. But there we are. You have a history before. You haven't been in politics before, right?
Never been in politics. Well, I've always voted, but never as a candidate.
So you've always voted.
Right.
Have you ever felt disenfranchised during that process?
You know, not actually in the voting piece. I think I realized, you know, as most people did in 2020, that the election integrity was paramount and really produced fake results. And so at that point, I felt disenfranchised, thinking, wow, this is really bad.
So 2020, I mean, to me, it's been very clear that the election in 2020 was grossly rigged, which is funny, too, because I point that out to everybody who will hear it, and then just immediately assume I'm this giant Trump supporter, which I am not.
Right, yeah.
but now if you even point out that we need to count votes, you suddenly are a Trump supporter. Of course, that's the two-party paradigm that the corporate media is trying to keep us all under. What are some of the candidates that you felt passionate about in the past that you supported before you threw your own hat in the ring?
Oh, good question. You know, there wasn't that many I knew personally, so I can't say there's none that really stand out in my mind. There's some local races. I worked hard for Bud Stonebreaker. He stood for the same kind of liberty and freedom that I do. So I actually signed waived. That's the first time I've ever got involved politically. I was actually signed waived for a candidate. That was a shocker. But that was in the 20 election. I did vote for Trump, and I didn't vote for him. I voted for him because I believe he was standing for the right thing. I think in the past, I pretty much voted as a Republican for the most part, simply because of the principles. The democratic principles, the social piece, I just can't get my mind around. It doesn't resonate with me. So I would vote. My vote rarely counted in the turnout of the elections in Hawaii. But no, you know, I have to go back a number of elections. I think I voted for Linda Lingle here in Hawaii, and she actually prevailed, which was a nice break.
Well, it's funny you said it. That, you know, I hear this from pretty much everybody I know in Hawaii, and pretty much everybody I know in most states, actually, where they say my vote just doesn't count.
Yeah.
If you're not part of the predominant party that's favored in that state, your vote's almost irrelevant.
Well, it's particularly egregious in Hawaii, where we've had decades of the same party rule now. And being irrelevant and dismissed by your legislators is become commonplace. I mean, even while we stood in Waikiki over the last couple of years, what we really wanted is we wanted liberty for the people. And you would think that the elected officials that would be something they would desire. They've taken an oath to uphold the Constitution. They don't do that. But it's not so much that, but so many policies that we've seen here locally where you'd get, 90-10 percentage, 90 for something or 90 against some issue, and the legislators would just go with the 10. They would basically say, we know the best. Well, and that's a problem.
The vaccine passport thing that was in Honolulu, and we were both at that one.
Yeah.
That one was really egregious. It was like 5,000 people wrote in and showed up and were calling. I mean, they couldn't handle the volume of people against the bill or the whatever that was, and yet they passed it anyway.
Yeah, Governor Ige and his executive orders and all of those people and politicians and institutions that lined up around him or for him, and those policies, they represent everything that's wrong with our system. That people's voices and votes and thoughts and belief systems, they do not matter. And so that was one of the things that provoked me to run. That the people need their voice back. The reality is that this is the people's government. And that people don't participate. They don't participate because they think that their vote doesn't count, and that's a big problem.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I think it's hard to argue with that position. I mean, like you said, depending on what party you're affiliated with in your state, your vote might not have very much effect, and that is part of the problem that we have overall in the United States in total, not just in Hawaii. What one of the things that's been really egregious too during this whole process is the way the media has been covering things. I mean, like, social media will kick you off the platform for even questioning whether the election had any integrity or not. Corporate media will just absolutely lampoon you as some kind of psychopath for claiming that there might be election fraud, despite overwhelming evidence of election fraud in numerous states. What do you think the solution is to the corporate media portion of this? Because really, it's not even just government that's the problem and the politicians, but it's the way that the media is portraying it to the masses. It's just beyond ludicrous now.
Yeah, that's actually probably the most difficult thing to resolve because they're not bound by any regulations. I mean, I hate regulations in general. It's interesting that you asked about media. I talked to a young man today. He asked me about media, and I said the problem is censorship. The fact that we have a media piece that determines what is disseminated, how much of it, and what's its content. And if people don't agree with that kind of presentation, they censor them. You mentioned it a moment ago, they're just taken off platforms. So this inherently creates a vacuum of information, and people can't make good decisions because they're only hearing one side. And the fact that they enrolled corporate media, people have to use their pocketbooks. I think corporate will only listen to money. I don't know. There's no actually good solution. And in here in Hawaii, local business went right along with the mandates. Local business, airlines, medical, they should have stood up to you and said, no, we will not participate in passports, in vaccine mandates. If they had stood, this wouldn't have prevailed. They didn't stand in other countries and it didn't prevail. So the people must be heard.
Well, I agree 100% with you on that. Some people did stand, though, which I
pretty rare.
Especially in Hawaii, I thought it was especially heroic because they were just such outliers.
Yeah.
Don at the Donor Shack,
That's right.
one of my favorites. I know there were quite a few places on Oahu that stood up. Going around, I just did a tour of 8 states. So I actually went through Alaska, Washington, Oregon, California, Arizona, Utah, Nevada. There's one I'm missing that I also did, but Hawaii. Hawaii as well. In the rules seem so arbitrary and capricious. They're so different everywhere. I mean, when I was out in Arizona, every nightclub was totally packed. All the young people were out drinking, having a good time, live music. I mean, there wasn't a mandate, a passport, nothing. And yet, there weren't bodies in the streets. I mean, so to me, it's pretty clear that the whole thing has been some kind of media charade from the get-go. Why do you think that Hawaii in particular has such a problem getting out from underneath that corporate media yoke?
Corruption. One word, corruption. I think that Hawaii's politicians are essentially puppets. They take their marching orders from other politicians in D.C. They listen to CDC, FDA. They listen to organizations. They don't actually think themselves. They don't actually discern. They don't actually gain wisdom. It's much easier to put the responsibility on somebody else and then take the money. So that you've seen that here locally. You saw government agencies, facilities, individuals taking resources from big pharma, from big media, and implementing policy accordingly. So until we have people in these positions of authority in government that don't take these kinds of corrupt, I call them bribes, I don't call them bribes, I would say that they don't adhere to these policies for pay for play, let's use that word, pay for play. I think DC was actually leveraging local government. If you don't take and enforce these mandates, then they leverage them by threatening to withhold resources. In Hawaii, they caved. Other states actually did not. There were other governors across the nation that said we will not institute these mandates, and they didn't get the funds, and they were good for them.
Okay, so one of the things that I'm hearing a lot from some of your fellow candidates is, they want to tear down the existing system, hoolie the system. They say a lot of compelling things that I think most of us agree with, probably you as well, but they haven't really outlaid specifics for that. Yeah. Now, I know from having talked to you earlier that you had some specifics. Can you share some of that with us?
Well, I think everybody knows that operating in the current system with the legislators being all Democrats, the idea that the governor is going to make policy by engaging the legislative branch is pie in the sky. In reality, though, the governor does have more authority than any other governor in the nation. This authority allows him to nominate directors, deputy directors, and the next chain down, and ultimately 10,000 people in Hawaii. So what we are going to do is we're going to change the nature of the way government is implemented. Policy actually in Hawaii is implemented through the departments, whether it's Department of Health, Department of Education, DLNR. These departments actually implement policy. These decisions about what types of policy does not come from the legislative branch. So we're going to change the direction of our state vis-a-vis the direction and the leadership within these various departments. So by renominating, and I realize that some of these take Senate confirmation, but these are the conversations that we're going to have. We will change the nature and the direction and the decision-making process for the people through these departments. And that includes the Attorney General, the Sheriff's Department, the Port Authority, Airport Division, Transportation. All of these are directed by the governor, including the funding piece. So the governor has authority over the funding of all these departments. So we're going to look at the direction of the state via the departments, and then we're going to use the funding piece as a component as well.
Well, that was definitely an issue for me when I was working at the Department of Health. I kept showing them study after study that unemployment was going to be way more lethal than COVID, way more lethal than vaccine side effects, anything like that. And they said, "Oh, don't show anybody that. That's bad for our budget."
That's right.
What they told me. So I definitely think attacking the funding of these government institutions is fundamental. So that's a great answer. High five on that one.
Okay.
We talked about a couple of your people that you've been politically active for in the past. But who are some of your, moving to a broader question, who are some of your larger political heroes? Could be anybody. It could be founding father.
I would say that there's a number of them. I actually heard this question the other day, and the first thing that came up for me was Abraham Lincoln. Here's a man who stood when the nation was in its most divisive state ever, and even up to this day, when the North and South were literally fighting each other to death. And yet he stood. Principles governed his decision making, and ultimately order and righteousness came back to the land. And so he's a hero. I would say that Reagan is a hero. Reagan, again, he wasn't a politician, which was beautiful. His intellect, his humor, his courage, and then he would call things balls and strikes, black and white. The fact that he didn't waver about what he believed. I would say currently, the governor of South Dakota, her name is
Kristi Noem.
Kristi Noem. I think I had a great deal of admiration
I
for
like
her.
Kristi Noem a lot too. Okay.
When these mandates came down, she said, "Nope, I'm standing." And for her stand and her courage, I would a great deal of appreciation for her.
Well, I'm with you 100% on her. By the way, this interview isn't just an interview. This is a test. And all the questions are pass-fail. And you've actually passed most of them, but I'm going to have to chalk this one up to a fail.
Okay.
I completely disagree about Abraham Lincoln.
All right.
He instituted greenbacks. He was the first one to institute unsound money. He perpetrated a genocide on the South. He didn't actually free the slaves. The whole Emancipation Proclamation was an after effect, basically a spin job after the war. So I'm going to disagree with you 100% on Abraham Lincoln.
Okay.
And
that's the beauty of liberty. I have no, that's good. Good for you.
And I think that Reagan was a puppet for corrupt CIA stooge George Bush Sr., but that's, that's my opinion, so I'm going to throw that out there.
Well, how about Ron DeSantis?
Again, I want to like Ron DeSantis.
Yeah,
I do like Kristi Noem. That's unequivocal, that's a pass.
So I'll tell you what I like about Ron DeSantis. The fact that he enrolls the public into his decision making, and then he takes that piece to the legislative branch. So he's standing both against government mandates, but his process of governing is very interesting, which I appreciate. The fact that he goes to people first, develops policy, and then presents this policy versus the other way around. I think it's very smart.
I agree with you. I've liked a lot of the policy decisions he's made. I want to be a bigger fan of him than I can be, because he has still not come out opposed to the experimental vaccinations, which are causing miscarriages, heart attacks, heart failure, stroke,
Yeah, he should.
seizures, and any responsible leader at this point should be like, hey, stop taking these injections.
Yeah.
Because they're far more dangerous than actually getting the disease.
Agreed.
Statistically, that's obvious. That was obvious to me when I was in the Department of Health when I read the very first clinical studies that other people didn't have access to, that weren't privy to, because they weren't there behind the government paywall like I was. The one thing I really do like about Ron DeSantis, though, is that he's making policy decisions based on some kind of reasonable research.
Yeah.
He's not just out there saying, oh, let's do X, Y, and Z because the CDC said so. He's like, actually, no, I looked at the data, and this, you know what I mean? And then,
Yeah, a little bit of gaining wisdom goes a long way.
yeah, actually gaining some wisdom, correct, yeah.
Yeah.
What for you as a candidate has been surprising as you've been running?
Difficulty getting your name recognition out there has been an interesting exercise. It's something that we're getting better at. It hasn't been a surprise. We've found, I would say, on a ratio of 10 to 1, that after people hear our campaign and listen to us, they're like, yes, we're all in. That hasn't been a surprise, but it's been a great sense of encouragement. Raising money is more difficult than I thought. The amount of money that you have to raise seems staggering. But they weren't unknowns. They were just to the level of understanding would be more of a surprise.
Well, and that's one of the reasons we're in this situation. Half the time the people who are running and successfully get elected are so in bed with so much moneyed interests by the time they get there that they have the money to do it.
Yeah, I guess it depends on who you're soliciting. When I watch other people's campaign spending reports, I see Mr. Green going off to posh hotels, meeting with executives of Pfizer, then the next day they get a full of max campaign donation. That's one consideration. But when you're calling private citizens like me and you're saying, how's life going? How's your business going? How's your family doing? Do you want to sow into your future? Do you want a different future? Are you willing to stand for something different? Because if you are, join me. And then I'll flat out just ask them, are you willing to support my campaign financially? And so that shows up for everything from $10 to $1,000. It just depends on what they're capable of. But it's not a if you do this, I'll do that. This conversation we're not having. And I think maybe that makes it more difficult. I'm not a politician, so I don't have a great deal of experience like this.
I think that in the case of Josh Green, who's arguably the most egregious fascist who's ever been in American politics ever, in my opinion, I think that there's just a pre-understood agreement that he's going to get the money and he's going to do what they want. I don't think they have the conversation where like, oh, are you going to do X, Y, Z? Then we'll pay you. Yeah. I think it's like they already know he's going to do exactly what they want. So here's the money. And it's really disheartening for me as somebody who's driven around and been politically active and helped canvass for candidates and stuff like that. It's really disheartening for me to see somebody with that much corporate money able to put signs everywhere. Just thousands and thousands of signs for this guy who to me represents Joseph Stalin or Adolf Hitler or Chairman Mao. I mean, Josh Green is the worst politician in my whole life that I've ever been involved with personally. And I'm
glad that I could probably call you for a donation. Because we clearly share the same view that imagine 4 or 8 more years of a candidate like Josh Green as head of our government is inconceivable at best and a nightmare beyond our imagination. So I'm agreeing with you.
Full dystopia if he gets in. Full dystopia. And the other concern is too is that I have and that you have and that anybody who's looking at the data reasonably has at this point is, okay, so he gets the nomination or whatever for the Democratic Party, which seems likely at this point.
Yeah.
They'll just rig it for him. It doesn't, even if, the most famous person in the world came out and said, hey, I'm running against Josh Green and came down and had, millions of dollars to spend, they're going to throw the ballots in the box for Green anyway. Mm. And that's my...
Well, election integrity, that's what you're describing.
Yeah.
So election integrity is the unknown. What we're hoping for through a number of organizations will verify the ballot and all that, but you cannot necessarily verify is it a person or is it a dead guy? So
Is it a person? Is
is it
that
a
guy?
living person that's actually voted, or is it some unknown person? Honestly, I don't know how to manage that. I just know that I'm looking forward to getting with Josh Green in a public forum and revealing the truth and exposing who he really is and what he's really like. And you know what? There's enough discontent across our land. There's enough votes out there. There's enough people out there that are tired. They are tired of the corruption. They're tired of the lies. They're tired of being dismissed. They will vote, and I can assure you that we intend to win. We will win. And when we get with him face to face, I'm going to take him down. I will talk. We will talk the truth, and we will reveal the truth. We're not going to hold back. So, looking forward to that conversation. I can assure you.
Well, I'm looking forward to that conversation too. I'm looking forward to anybody taking Josh Green down by any method possible.
He's not that difficult to take down, I can tell you.
But I just have one question. Honestly, it's just one question. If he answers it, it's over for him. How much money has he gotten from Pfizer? Mm-hmm. That's it. That's my only question for Josh Green. And if he answered it truthfully, his career as a politician will be over instantly.
I don't know if that's true, but people actually, you mentioned corporate earlier. People endorse candidates because they expect to get something. Right. I talked to somebody just the other day, a friend of mine, longtime business associate, called him and asked him for a donation. She said, wow, she said, I'm getting a lot of pressure from some big contractors that I need to donate to this guy and support this guy. And I said, well, this is liberty. This is your life. The question is how are you going to live your life? And after a conversation,
she was getting pressured to vote.
To make donations to Green's campaign.
Oh, gross.
And so I said, you know what? This is your life. You must choose. You must choose liberty, or you must choose this. And after a conversation of about 10 minutes, she said, nope, I'm donating to you. So what she was really saying was, I've counted the cost. No longer will I bow to this machine that says you will do as you're told to get something in return. There's enough out there. There's enough abundance for everybody. We don't have to, long or hope for some scraps to get by. No, that's not true. We just have to stand.
All right, so I just watched a video the other day. Was it the Board of Education? There was a huge thing where the public actually got to speak. I saw Big Al, I saw Bango, I saw Jessica Priya, I saw you, I saw a few other people. I think BJ Penn was there too. I mean, it's absolutely ludicrous that we're telling our children they're not allowed to breathe.
Yeah. And
that we're normalizing suffocation for our children. I mean, this is like some kind of weird, sick, almost like sexual fetish, deviant dystopia that we're entering, and we're putting our kids in it. Tell me a little bit about your speech at the BOE, the experience, and also a note of hope. Look how many great freedom fighters there were down there ready to testify.
It was like a reunion.
I mean, it was
a bit of a reunion in the sense that everybody stood and should be standing for the kids. The fact that this mask mandate is still in place in schools is unbelievable. We're the last state in the nation. They're still requiring our kids to be masked up in class. And this is about money. Let's just break this down. This is strictly about money. They have their money sunsets at the end of the school year. As long as they keep the kids masked, they get the money. So this is exactly what it's about. This is not about kids' welfare or keeping them from getting COVID or keeping the teachers from getting COVID. This is an absolute lie. It's a travesty. So my time down there, as I went down there to talk about authority, who do they think gave them the authority? It's the delegation doctrine. The Department of Health doesn't have the authority to implement a mask. They don't have the authority to delegate it to the school board. The school board doesn't have the authority to delegate it to the teachers. There's no authority given to implement these mandates or these mask wearing for the kids, and the kids are suffering. The kids are sick. They're losing vital years in their lives. I cannot even imagine the consequences that our society is going to bear because of bad policy, because of greedy people.
The funny thing about the mask thing, I mean, it's not funny, it's tragic, but there's so much about it. Physically, it's so unhealthy. You're limiting the amount of oxygen you need for your brain to operate at peak performance, or even at normal performance. And not only that, most of these masks have like microplastics that are being inhaled, that are going straight into these kids' systems. And none of that, all of the physical effects, which are all negative, there's no positive side on the physical equation if you actually look at the data. And worse, though, is the psychological aspect. Mm-hmm. It's like, we do as we're told. We wear a mask. We shut our mouths and protect others. It's just such so anti-American, it's so disgusting. So I want to thank you for being out there fighting. I've been out there fighting with you, so I've seen you. I know you're real. The Aloha Freedom Coalition. I know that was your thing that you were, helping to make happen. You've been one of the only people in Hawaii out there fighting with all of our other friends that we just mentioned. I guess I should leave with one final nice, easy softball. Just really let you just nail it right out of the park.
All right.
Let's go ahead and discuss the Honolulu Rail.
The rail. The albatross. The Honolulu Rail.
Let's discuss the rail for a minute, shall we?
It's a head shaker and it's a heartbreaker, really. I just saw in the paper that they've decided to end it at Cook Street. This was this morning's news. That HART has a new rail and it's going to go to Cook Street. So it's going to go a little farther than where it's at now. It doesn't matter where it goes. It will always be a failure. It will always be a financial drag and deficit for the state of Hawaii. And I say the state, meaning all the islands are paying it, but only one can actually ride, which is insanity. If I were on a neighbor island, I would just say flat out, I'm not paying my taxes. I'm not paying that 4.712 quote temporary tax to fund the rail. This is absolute insanity. So the rail it was a pay for play from the beginning. It was Hanneman's shot at gaining votes. Should never have done it. The people should never have endorsed it. The Fed should have never funded it. And so this is bad government. This is what bad policy looks like when politicians get their hands in the cookie jar. And this is it. The consequences will never go away. That's a sad thing to say.
The other thing that I was talking to Judge Kahau about, the way the Kapolei even exists is all through some crazy corruption. Like they had to, in order to even build that entire part of Oahu, which by the way, I think is the worst part of Hawaii. It's like Orange County. It's like, I feel like literally when I'm in Kapolei, I feel like I might as well be in Torrance. They're like Corona or something. It's just like this nasty, dirty, hot little strip mall of corporate garbage. Like it's the worst place in Hawaii. And it only exists through like rampant bad government and corruption. And where are they building the train to? Kapolei. It's like the whole reason for being, the whole reason to exist for the whole scam, billions of dollars down the hole of Hawaiian taxpayer money. It's just shocking to me. It's shocking to me.
Well, the rail and the second city is kind of an oxymoron when you think about it. The inception and the vision of a second city was to keep people from having to go into Honolulu. So then to turn around and put a rail in to move people into Honolulu is kind of like, okay, this is kind of missing the point. So I think the idea, it took a long time to get the people to agree to a second city. It's never been implemented. So now you have two cities, two administrations, two budgets to underwrite. And then you put the rail on top of it. No place to get on, no place to get off. What happens when you get off? What do you do then? You have no transportation, you have no parking, you have no infrastructure. Literally, there's nothing I can think of that is that the rail brings a benefit to the people of Hawaii. And
it's an eyesore. I mean, anybody who lives in Kalihi or anywhere west of downtown is not going to have a view of the beautiful ocean. It's just so unbelievably sad. Everything about the rail is just like a condemnation of humanity.
Well, it's not like the pyramids, I can assure you. It doesn't function now.
It's not like the pyramids. That's the best. That's the best analogy I've got. I was going to use the sports analogy because I know you like sports analogies occasionally. Talk about moving the goalposts.
Yeah.
It's like,
well, there you go.
Yeah, it's like,
that's another one.
The rail's not a success. We'll just make sure that we have a second city over here that needs the rail to survive. And by the way, what's in that second city? All corporate garbage. Outback Steakhouse, Costco, no benefit for small local business, local families, nothing. Just a way to drain the Hawaiian people of their precious economic resources for giant corporations who are destroying the planet on purpose. It's shocking.
Shocking, yeah. And it really is. It really is making the ability for the farmer on the windward side to exist. So this water piece, the ability to provide water for our islands, it has to be changed. We need desalination. It must happen. And so, we can give water back we give to the west side, so the windward side can have its water back. We can have industry again. We can have dairy. We can have produce. We can have poultry. We can have beef. We can have all these industries back if they could have their water back. So there's a lot that can be done for our state. There's a lot of good. There's a lot of hope. We shouldn't be in despair, but we should exercise self-discipline and courage and step forward and do our part. You must put people in positions of leadership that are thoughtful, that there's enough humility to admit when there needs to be change, even if it's their own. And you got to vote, period. Underline, you have to vote.
And we have to count the votes.
You have to count the vote.
Minor detail.
No, they'll count the vote. So we have to win by a vast majority. We believe that 300,000 people who see the need for change, we will see change. So that's the deal.
Gary, thank you so much for being on the show today, taking time out of your busy campaign. I know you're super popular, probably got your finger in like 8 million pies. I want to thank you for being a freedom fighter on the streets of Waikiki, on the streets of Honolulu. I've missed being armed shoulder to shoulder with you in the trenches, with you, Bingo, Big Al, Jessica, Don from the Donor Shack, all these other heroes who are there in Hawaii fighting for the Hawaiian people. All the Hawaiian people, not just the native Hawaiian people, but also everybody who lives there. And I really appreciate it, and I want to thank you again, and I hope this video helps in some way. It's probably going to take me like 7 hours to edit down, though, so I'm cutting it.
Well, Ryan, it's been a pleasure, but be nice.
I'm always nice. Except for
I never get to throw you any hardball questions, so what's up with that?
I'm the interviewer, bro. Not the interviewee. Not only that, I mean, I'm always nice unless you're Josh Green, in which case, bro, you're going to get lickings.